This episode might seem like it doesn't have a whole heck of a lot to do with Pittsburgh or Pittsburgh's football team. It actually does. Good morning to you. Good Wednesday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports. This is Daily Shot of Steelers. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into hockey and or baseball, I also happen to offer daily shots of the other two teams in town that I cover, the Penguins and the Pirates. The National Football League has the most bizarre, boneheaded controversy on its hands, and I kind of think it's a good thing that Roger Goodell and everybody else involved hit it head on yesterday in New Orleans in advance of the Super Bowl. And that began with Goodell addressing what I guess some people consider to be the elephant in the room, that the referees and the officials favor the Chiefs, or depending on who it is that's telling this tale, they favor Patrick Mahomes. Now, this is something that goes back throughout sports history. This is not new. The previous untouchable in football was, of course, Tom Brady. Well, it's probably not a coincidence that Brady won all of those Super Bowls, so everybody saw every time that something went his way, which was a lot because he was really good. Everyone used to say that all the calls would go Wayne Gretzky's way in the NHL. To some extent, he was respected enough that he would get protected, but certainly not to any scandalous extent. In baseball, one of my favorite examples goes back to the Atlanta Braves of the 1990s and early 2000s when they had the amazing trifecta of Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, and John Smoltz. And the common sentiment was that umpires would give them strike zones that are 4 feet wide, as opposed to just recognizing that Maddux in particular might have been the best control pitcher of all time. But yeah, along come the Chiefs, and they make the AFC Championship game pretty much for a decade straight. They win a whole bunch of Super Bowls. Mahomes is the MVP all the time. And then a pattern emerges, mostly this season, I should add, mostly in this regular season, in which several pivotal, game-changing calls went Kansas City's way. And our national dialogue and discourse being what they've become, it feels like the first thing that everybody jumps at doing is going conspiracy first, which, again, is okay. You know, that's been around forever as well in sports. But this time, I don't know, man. This feels different. I think there are people that actually believe this. I think there are people who, even after giving it some real thought, believe this. So Roger Goodell bit at this first yesterday in his annual really big Super Bowl press conference. Covered a ton of issues, by the way. This one was more of a glancing issue, but he referred to it as ridiculous. And I don't know that there's a better word for it. I do know that there's a better way to explain why it's ridiculous, because that had come later in the same day from Scott Green, the executive director of the NFL Referees Association. I'm quoting Mr. Green directly here. "It is insulting and preposterous to hear conspiracy theories that somehow 17 officiating crews consisting of 138 officials are colluding to assist one team." Now, he went on to detail that most of these officials only see the same team twice over the course of an entire season. So let's say you're one of these refs and you're in on this, and who even knows what this would be hypothetically? Are you being paid specifically to make key critical time calls on behalf of the Chiefs? If so, who's paying you? And how do you get all, what was this number again? 138 of them to go along, and then on top of that, have all 138 of them sworn to silence for all eternity. Even though a bunch of them are either going to move on to other jobs or retire or get fired or whatever, there's going to be turnover. But now every person who just went out the door and never again will collect a paycheck from the NFL is somehow magically never going to rat out this process. Amazing. They're never going to run to someone like me in the journalism business and say, guess what? Can you believe it? We got paid, all 138 of us, to protect Mahomes and the Chiefs. This right here is why I am constantly cringing at any suggestion that the referees might be calling the game that you're watching poorly because they're out to get your team. They're not. They couldn't care less about your team. And if they do, or any of them do, it's going to be one out of a pack in that group. And even that is immensely unlikely. You don't make it to the NFL as a referee by behaving even in the tiniest way in some Homerish fashion. You'll get weeded out so fast within that culture. Any league, NFL, NHL, Major League Baseball, you name it. Now, is there the occasional, like once or twice a decade, corrupt referee that gets exposed? Yeah, that happened famously in the National Basketball Association with Tim Donaghy, who was on the take. But even the way that blew up, even the way that became a larger-than-life story to the extreme that you might have actually recognized that name when I just mentioned it, should further reinforce the point of how incredibly, spectacularly, unimaginably rare something like that is. But even that doesn't apply here. This is football. Who are you going to pay? Are you going to pay just to the head referee? Because he's not the one that's going to make a holding call or a defensive pass interference call or something like that that's going to really spin the game around on its head. More often than not, that's going to be one of his surrogates. It's going to be a line judge. It's going to be a back judge. It's going to be a side judge. If your view is that NFL officiating is bad and it needs to get better, you're going to get all kinds of agreement, and it'll be fair. I happen to think it's pretty good overall, and I happen to feel that it's really good under the really strange circumstance that these guys don't do anywhere near the number of games that others in their profession do in other sports. But if you think that they stink, that's fine. Just understand that when officials stink, they stink across the board. They don't stink because they're favoring one team over another, and they definitely don't stink because they like the Chiefs or Taylor Swift or whatever. Wow, it's just only the dumbest possible thing to even think that. When we come back, J1Q. This segment of Daily Shot is brought to you by our good friends at Mike's Beer Bar. They're located on Federal Street, directly across from PNC Park. Mike has more than 500 beers on tap, including from more than 50 local breweries. Stop in and say hello. Tell Mike we sent you. Mike's Beer Bar. Today's J1Q comes from JW. Man, is this one good. He says, DK, you're advocating drafting a wide receiver in the first round. On the Monday show this week, you dismissed defensive line as merely a want rather than a need like wide receiver. Could you please review the Steelers' recent history of drafting to fill needs? And feel free to cite Artie Burns, Terrell Edmonds, Devin Bush, Najee Harris, Kenny Pickett, and Broderick Jones. I look forward to your analysis. Well played, my friend. That's the way to step to the front of the line. And here's what I have for you in return. Uncle, bad picks are bad picks. Picking by position is almost never the right thing to do. And when you pick by position, even at quarterback, even when the need is so clear at the most important position of all, and then you run into the worst quarterback class anyone's seen in a long time, and your choice is between Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis, you deserve exactly the wasted pick that you got. Now, there's nothing that precludes you from having a position in mind and choosing a player who's not Devin Bush and satisfying both the positional need and the need to have an actual talented player added to your organization. But I'm not about to disagree with you on this. What I am going to do is to reiterate my long-held stance that the position of need should be your tiebreaker. In other words, you get to number 21 in the draft, and you have 3 players that you grade pretty much equally. You might have additional considerations, such as whether or not you see your team as being a contender, a legitimate contender the following year, or whether you're going to draft for ceiling, meaning taking somebody who's a bit of a project. But otherwise, you line them up. And you say, which one of these plays the position that we could most use? That is what I mean. I can't speak for others, but that is what I mean when I say I want a wide receiver. If it's the Steelers' turn, and let's say there's a wide receiver who they have on their board, 5 or 6 slots below where they're currently picking, I don't know that I'd go for that receiver. But I do know that I'm not going to take somebody who's going to be, an outside linebacker. I'd look for some other way to work around that. Now, that's also when general managers have the freedom to trade up or trade down. This is a classic trade down scenario, the one I just described. Let's say there's a whole bunch of outside linebackers there. There's about to be a running of the table on outside linebackers where the Steelers are. They can just get the heck out of there. Get somebody else's, 3rd rounder, 5th rounder, whatever it is in return, and just slide down, watch the outside linebackers go somewhere else, and keep their arms folded the whole time. But if it's close, and if there's a wide receiver who they think is the right guy for them, but also might be the right guy for the team that's just behind them, that's picking right behind them, then they're not going to move down. Then they're just going to go ahead and take their wide receiver. So there's a lot of layers to this. It's not as simple as however I might have made it sound on Monday's show. My preference, my hope is that they end up with a wide receiver. How's that? Does that work better for you, JW? Way to checkmate me anyway, though, dude. I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Steelers. We'll be back with another one of these tomorrow.